Good afternoon. Thank you, patient audience. Is this on? Good afternoon. Thank you, patient audience. My name is Alexander Lee. I come from the United States. I teach in Beijing at New Oriental, but for 2.5 years I taught here in Changchun. It's a pleasure to be invited back by one of your students to talk to you about the passion of my life, which is laundry. For 15 years, I ran a nonprofit organization. I was once in college. In 1995, I invited a peace activist to a symposium. Her name was Helen Caldicott. She accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in the mid-1980s. And she gave a speech in which she said, if we all hung out our clothes, we could shut down the nuclear industry. I took that idea and ran with it and turned it into an organization. I've been in Time Magazine, on People Magazine, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, on the Colbert Report, and I've run an organization for now almost 20 years that tries to get Americans and people all over the world to hang out their clothes. So what I want to begin with is this number, 4%. This is a lie. This is the number that the United States government says we spend this amount of energy residentially on electricity to run our electric dryers. For years and years it was 5.8%, but then everybody got an iPad and an iPhone and an iThing, so now it's gone down to 4%. But this number is not a lie because of that. This number is a lie because millions of Americans go to the laundromat. 2 million Americans live in prison. Millions of Americans spend the night at a hotel every night. Lots of people go to a restaurant. So much more laundry is done, and it doesn't show up statistically. So there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and this is the damn lie. So much more energy. Project Laundry estimates probably 10% of electricity in the United States is spent washing and drying clothes, ironing them, and on the whole laundry cycle. That is residential electricity use, so about 1/3 of the electricity used in the United States. So that sort of sets the stage for why this is important. So I want you to look at the clothes that I'm wearing, right? I will see my mother next week for the first time in a year. And she will say, you gave a talk in a t-shirt with stains on it? Can you see the stains? No. But we have a standard brought to us by companies like this and by the people who sell us clothing that you can't go to an interview with a stain on your shirt. You can't go to a wedding, which I'm doing next week, with a stain on your shirt. And so I think it would be a great idea if we at least thought about that. And in America, Ben Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, founders of our country, all spoke to Americans during our revolution and said, why don't you wear homespun clothing? So this is patriotic. We should be, making an effort to save energy on the way that we wash our clothes. So one thing that Tide is doing right is they're giving us cold water. And actually one of the most effective things that has happened over the last few years is that people have started to use cold water instead of hot water. For a generation, their grandmothers said, you gotta wash your clothes in cold water, in hot water. And I said, this is crazy. And so actually Levi's and many other companies, Levi's, decided that they would start telling people on the clothing care tag on their clothing that they should line dry and that they should wash with cold water. And so this is a really good idea because we've saved a lot of energy this way. But one of the horrible things about this big orange container is not just that it will end up in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with a lot of other plastic swirling around in a big vortex, but that the cap is opaque, which means that you can't properly measure how much you need. And do you know how much laundry detergent you actually need for most loads of laundry that you do? None. The head of Seventh Generation, the founder of Seventh Generation, the former president of Seventh Generation, a green laundry detergent company, was quoted in the Wall Street Journal as saying, "It's our dirty little secret that most of the time, unless you have oil on your clothes, you really don't need laundry detergent. Agitation and water are enough to remove most of the dirt." One of the things that's horrible that happens every year is that we have thousands upon thousands of fires, house fires, started by dryers because people push their dryer back up against the wall and they crush that little pipe. And so one thing that we could do is install something like this so that people don't start fires by pushing their dryer back against the wall. Because lint, that's your clothing falling apart, starts thousands and thousands of fires every year, millions and millions of dollars of property damage, and at least 50 people die every year in house fires started by dryers. So what made us sort of successful in getting the word out was not actually that people started changing their patterns, but that people love a good fight. And in America, you're not allowed to hang out your clothes in many, many communities. About 60 million Americans, or 20% of the population, live in community associations where they're not allowed to hang out their clothes. These are places like mobile home parks and condominiums, and they're not allowed to hang out their clothes. It's ugly, it's what poor people do. It's a fire danger, they say, compared to the dryer. So one of the things that made us, or propelled us onto the front pages of the big newspapers in the United States, was leading a campaign of legislation to try and make it possible for Americans to dry again. This is not just an American problem. This is a problem in Uzbekistan. This is a problem in the United Arab Emirates. This is a problem all over the world. There are people right here in China who have passed rules that say you're not allowed to hang out your clothes. And yet for thousands of years in China, people have dried their clothes in the sun. Why do we need to use a machine that uses a preposterous amount of energy to dry our clothes? That's my question. So the last thing I really want to talk about is the CDC. And this one is a little technical and not as important as everything else that I've been saying. But the CDC has done a really good job. The CDC is the Center for Disease Control. They have done a good job of telling hospitals and the public how to properly wash their clothes. But they could do a better job. And I know that many people in the audience today might be scientists someday. And one of the things that is missing is basic science. Because all of the research that the CDC relies on is not their own research. They rely on research that's done at universities. And everybody who's talking about laundry and researching laundry is always testing with hot water. And so there are no studies that show, hey, we could get the clothes just as clean and they would be just as safe in the hospital if we used cold water. So we need more original research on this. So that's a few of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today in this TED Talk. I think the most important thing is please hang out your clothes and help us save that 10% of energy that is spent washing and drying clothes. Use cold water and don't use detergent. Finally, I want to say we can design ourselves out of it, many of our problems. Across the United States, it's unusual to have balconies where you can dry your clothes. This is a dormitory in Denmark where they made a good design decision so that students could dry their clothes. We can design beautiful things like this for drying our clothes. This is called a Hills hoist, and in Australia, it's ubiquitous. It will last a lifetime, it's well built, And there's no reason that we can't line dry our clothes across the world and across the United States, where I come from. Thank you for letting me come to Changchun and talk about this.